Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. So, yeah, hope everyone's doing good. It's 10:15 on a Tuesday, a pretty dark and wintry day, although the sun just kind of came out, so it's kind of nice. So, yeah, I'm continuing my path back here with uploading videos at a fairly regular basis. I I usually do a video every day, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll set the video up as a premiere, just to kind of break up, the pacing and the timing of things. But I love to do a video every day. Lately, since there was a lot of downtime, there was about 2 weeks or so that I did not make any videos because of some computer issues. But now, luckily, I have a new computer, so I'm back at it. And so now I'm kind of resuming that schedule of doing a video almost every day. So there's a ton of movies to get to. I literally have a stack of movies that I've been wanting to get to and to talk about. I I also a few weeks ago realized there was a handful of other movies that I've actually owned for quite a while, but I've never done a show on. So stay tuned for those as well. So an endless amount of movies to talk about, as always here at Film Fanatic headquarters, and I've been on a big tear again of going back to my favorite genre of all time, and that is the world of exploitation. Can't get enough of it. It's a drug that I can take every day. And I've been on a pretty good tear with a couple of purchases. I went to Bull Moose about 2 weeks ago, maybe a little bit more, and got a bunch of movies that I've never seen before. And I was blown away. Going to Bull Moose now is pretty different because I mentioned in a previous video that, part of the magic of going, why I'm a physical media guy is just going to a shop. I'm a tactile based person. I love seeing the artwork. I love like holding those materials that I love in my hands, and I love that the search, the kind of the quest, where you find when you find something that is really interesting, or you find something that you've been looking for. It's such a rush. It's exciting, and especially in this day and age with like where physical media is, and then the dilemma of all of the streaming platforms, where I think people who use streaming, again, I can't blame them for doing it. I can understand people using it because of the convenience. But hey, we're kind of a it's kind of the American way now, unfortunately. People want things quick and fast and furious. But there's an illusion around, I think, streaming, of where people do buy movies, obviously, through streaming. But there's never, you don't actually, but as a consumer, you don't actually own the media. And I've heard stories where people will see things almost to a degree that they've bought that is not per se a physical, you know, Blu-ray or 4K or even DVD. It will kind of disappear through like whatever platform that person might be using, or they decide to purchase to buy it, as opposed to just like renting it. And so there's an illusion that you actually, and I think people are starting to realize that. I think prices are going up for that, as they have for everything. But I think there's a thing of where it's just it's just not true. Like, you don't actually own those movies. And so when I feel like, as a consumer and as a film fanatic, I'm going to buy movies, I'm actually owning them. I mean, of course, it's a thing of it can come down to just having space for it, and it does take up a lot of room. I recently just bought, or I actually got around Christmas time. I got some shelving from Santa Claus, so I've been able to kind of. I'm slowly starting to get more of a, you know, slowly getting some of my films organized that have been kind of building up, and I did run out of shelving probably about four months ago. So I kind of got a little bit behind. So now I'm slowly getting all of those together. What I'm going to do eventually for this channel, which I don't think I've ever done, is when it's done, as far as organizing my movies, I'm going to do like a little tour of my collection. Just do like an in-camera video of all my movies and all those kinds of things. So it should be fun. It's going to be a little ways till until that happens because I still have a lot more to go, and I've been picking away at it every day or every couple of days. But that's the thing for me is the quest, finding those gems, and up until like 6 or 7 months ago, when I would typically go to Bull Moose or even Goodwill, but especially Goodwill is I'd find the horror section, the Blu-ray horror section, and I would just spend a couple hours or whatever, 45 minutes, just going through all of the aisles and finding different movies and and all those kinds of things. But now, and you'd have the say the more kind of big budget Hollywood kind of commercial horror films, and then you'd find these like super low budget exploitation horror films nestled within it. But so you'd have to like sift through a lot of stuff. But now it's crazy because when you go to Bull Moose, they have like specific aisles for exploitation movies, and they're labeled as like you go in now, and there's the boutique label. At least the Waterville, which is about an hour away, the Waterville Bull Moose from my house. When you go in, they have the big, massive movie selection area on the far left, but now there's a section now where it's labeled boutique labels, or the boutique section, which is kind of crazy because now that's where all of the Vinegar Syndrome stuff will be, the Blue Underground, Mon Macabre, Severin, of course. So many great titles. It's a little bit odd because I'm sometimes a little bit like they'll have a what I have what I have noticed is they'll have like a they'll have which is weird to me. They'll have like the 30th or 40th anniversary of Tom Cruise's Cocktail, and right next to it will be like a Lucio Fulci movie. It's weird. I don't get why that's set up that way. But so they kind of collect they take a lot of the films that are like kind of collectible issued or anniversary films and put them all together. But the further you get into it, you see that this is where all of the primetime low budget exploitation movies reside. So, but as far as finding those kinds of movies, it's a quicker way of finding it. Not I love taking the time to look at it, but you can find titles a lot quicker, and it's wild that that's a thing. So yeah. So today I'm going to talk about a movie I bought, and I had never seen it before, and I got it at the Bull Moose, my last trip, which was about 2 weeks ago. Bull Moose in Bangor, and this movie, again, it was never heard about it before, and I just think this movie is amazing. And that is Memorial Day Massacre. This is a beautiful edition. This was put out by Vinegar Syndrome. This movie's just super cheesy and ridiculous and amazing. It's It's a slasher movie too. It's not. I guess you could say it's not maybe your typical slasher film. I mean, but it definitely is a slasher movie. You know, typically a lot of the slasher films have a lot more of a darker tone to them, or you have your typical kind of masked killer, masked psychopath in the film. This is a little bit of a different thing because this is centered around where the killer is kind of this feral child who is living in the woods, and he has clearly kind of lost his mind, but he is he's an animal living in the woods, and he's essentially he's the killer, he's the slasher in the movie. So it's kind of unusual. Like you don't, I've never really seen that before. That kind of take on the slasher genre, but it's definitely otherwise. It's definitely has that aesthetic, and this movie's also very well. It's super cheesy and it's totally ridiculous. It's super funny too. It's kind of the characters, the actors, the cast is wonderful. The writing is really great. It's actually beautifully shot. It's super campy and it's really kind of silly and goofy, and so there's a lot of kind of comedic lighter elements in this film, which again is not something you typically always see in a slasher film, say like My Bloody Valentine or you know Mad Men or The Burning. There obviously are some slight comedic elements, but this is almost to a degree a little bit more of a, I don't know, a slasher slash, pun intended, comedy or black comedy. It's pretty goofy. It's pretty silly, but the kills are amazing. But this packaging is awesome. This was put out by Vinegar Syndrome. It's got a really nice slip cover, really awesome artwork. I never heard of this movie before, and I was sold on it like I am most of the time when I buy these movies. It's the artwork. Typically, what happens is if I come across a movie, this is like a perfect example. I will, you know, be really excited when I see the artwork, and I'll be like, "Wow, that looks kind of awesome. That looks up my alley. That looks super cheesy and terrible and amazing. This movie might be for me." And then so what I'll do is I'll look at the movie, and if it's got some generally good kind of reviews or things about it on the back, that will entice me more. But the thing that usually sells me, the selling point for me, is I will check the year. And it sounds kind of, I don't know, maybe maybe it might sound a tad elitist or a little bit snobby, but I don't really like to buy a lot of newer films. I don't. My again, I mean, I should reword that. I still do buy newer films, of course. I've done a couple of shows on real recent films. I mean, Nosferatu and Longlegs, which I have now. Um, in a Violent Nature, which is a modern slasher film that just came out last year, which was awesome. Late Night with the Devil, which is a brand new film that came out last year, which I really loved. So it's not that I don't, but the majority of my time and money that I spend is going to be on, you know, I will really seek out films from the 70s without a doubt. Anything made in the 70s is going to be something I'm probably going to buy. Of course, early 80s, primetime slasher, time, and all of the great slasher and exploitation movies. And I have, and I do own a lot of movies that came out, in the mid to late 60s, and beyond. But typically, I will, buy movies in that genre or in those decades. Like that's my go-to. And but typically, if I see, it's funny because typically if I see a movie in the aisle and it looks like a a real kind of sleazy, trashy exploitation movie, and I look at it and then it says it came out in 2000 and 19. A lot of the times I will put the movie back, and the reason is I'm when it comes to this genre that I love so much and it's my favorite. I'm kind of a purist about it. I kind of want the old school flavor. I kind of want the real deal shit. So typically that's what I'll do. There are obviously I've talked about how grindhouse cinema exploitation movies have had a tremendous influence on modern films. Without a doubt. I used two examples the other day when I was talking about that. Movies like Ty West Maxine. Big time, huge. That movie was so influenced by exploitation movies, slasher movies, Italian giallo films, and I think even The Substance with Demi Moore, which is just a ridiculously insane movie, especially the last half, the last act of that movie. Really, I felt was greatly inspired by 70s and 80s horror exploitation movies because it's so trashy and just bonkers crazy. So these films have still culturally have had still have an impact on modern films, and I'm glad that that is the case. And of course, you can't forget Quentin Tarantino. You can't really, you can't really see, pretty much the world of exploitation. Is there's you see that influence in every one of his films. I mean, he's very outspoken about that. But I typically, again, I'm when it comes to this genre, that's kind of where my brain is at. And so, I bought this on a whim. I was like, this looks great. I checked it out, and it came out. Memorial Day Massacre came out in 1989, which for me is funny because that's almost. And again, I'm painting maybe putting myself in a box, but for me, when I saw that the year was '89, I'm like, it might be almost a cutoff. I'm not a huge fan. I mean, there were and there are a lot of great horror films and movies in general that came out in the '90s, but I don't really, the '90s was not really my favorite decade for films, so I typically don't really, when I think of horror films that came out in the '90s, I think of movies like I Know What You Did Last Summer, or a lot of these kind of bigger budget Hollywood films that have a real, where, well, like for me, the thing with a lot of these exploitation movies is that, you know, the way they say, the way they're that like youth or the young people or teenagers are portrayed, they're more or less portrayed as like kind of real everyday kids or everyday people, and the characters are. But I felt like in the '90s, what ended up happening was they ended up using for a lot of horror films that were coming out in the '90s. And again, this is just my own take on things. But I think when the '90s came, a lot of you know horror films obviously still came out, but I felt like things got a little more glossy. Like everyone who was casted in, who was part of the cast of a movie in the '90s, they all kind of took on this like model quality. Everybody looked really nice and pretty to the point of where it wasn't so believable, and it lost a lot of its grit. And then everything became kind of sanitized. Everything looked too perfect, and that's why I always go back to, if you look at anything that came out, say in '93 or '94, and then you look at a movie, say that came out in '78 or '82, it's way grittier, I think. And so that's why I, just go back to it, even though there are great films. But this came out in '89, and I was like, well, fuck it. It's Vinegar Syndrome. I have many titles I own a shit ton of movies from Vinegar Syndrome, and I can't think of a movie that they've put out that I have not really loved. So I bought it, and this movie just is such an awesome ride. Again, it's a kind of a unique take on the slasher film, but this movie is a movie that you could really party down with. Like, you could get together with a group of friends, have some beers and pizza or whatever, play some beer pong, and watch this movie, and totally get off watching it and totally have a kick-ass time because it's a party. It's a it's a really beautiful transfer. The It's beautifully shot. The whole film kind of takes place in this kind of the state park, and there is the typical slasher trope of a group of young people, and all of these campers do get picked off one by one by this feral child who is the killer, who has been living and hiding, and you find out that he is related to one of the main park ranger. They have this estranged relationship, but it's super funny. It's super silly, super. It's kind of a wacky movie. It's kind of a wacky premise, and the kills at first are like, okay, pretty good, but by the second and third act, the kills in this movie are actually really awesome and pretty impressive. And I was like, okay, all right, I'm on board, because hey, if you're a fan of slasher films, and again, slasher films, in the exploitation world, slasher films are my favorite. And for me, you gotta have great atmosphere. Like, to me, that's key. I want to be able to be transported into a world. I'm all about world building and being transported into that world for that 90-minute time frame or whatnot. It's got to have, and if you're transported to that to that area, to that zone, then that obviously creates really great atmosphere. So when you have that atmosphere, that's really what does it for me. I mean, I'm all about the atmosphere, and so, and with that being said, to me, a slasher film's got to have, well, it's got to have a good story, but it's got to have great, awesome kills, and this movie actually does. It gets better and better as the film goes, but it's super silly, it's super goofy, um it's probably one of the cheesiest movies I've seen in a while, but it's got a lot of these great kind of jokey segments. There's a lot of great little comedic moments in this movie. Great cast, really great cast. I love this movie. I think it's awesome. I had never heard about it before. It was a brand new. I think it just on came out on Blu-ray and 4K. It was directed by Robert Hughes, who also, which is crazy, directed the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Mystic Knights, and Tur Nagog, which is kind of crazy. The cast is great. Great chemistry between the characters and the actors. Good solid writing. John Kerry, Mark Mears, and Mark Casso, fantastic. And again, this movie came out in 1989, but it's pure 80s exploitation cheese, but as a slasher movie, and entertaining as all hell. I love this movie, and pure healthy. It's 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 pure. It's a pure, healthy, escapist film. It's just great. It's super entertaining. I can't recommend it enough. There's some really good special features on here too. It's a beautiful package. I got this pretty cheap too. But another killer addition to my collection. I can't recommend this movie enough. I think it's, yeah, it's super entertaining. And again, I'm at a point now when I see movies, that I come across movies that look really awesome. I'll look at the label, and I'm at a point now where everything that I see that Vinegar Syndrome puts out, I'm kind of on board because, again, I have a shit ton of Vinegar Syndrome movies, and I can't think of a movie that I've bought. Some movies I've seen that I grew up watching, and then a ton of movies that I've never seen before, and I've been just blown away by it. But definitely, I highly recommend this. This movie totally kicks ass. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.